Data sovereignty was an issue, but it has now a heightened awareness in the market. I mean, the trade war is on the moment only on goods. What will happen if the EU says, hey, we tax digital services? No, I mean, it's not unthinkable in this day, but do we need to be closer to home? Do we need to make sure we can run the system critical workloads in our own jurisdiction?
Welcome to another episode of Advising the Advisors. I'm your host, Bolu from Kenley. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Michael Eiden, Managing Director at Alvarez Marsal, where he helps lead their artificial intelligence and machine learning practice. Thanks for joining me today, Michael.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. So let's just start it off easy. If you could just please explain at a high level the sorts of organizations you help and kinds of problems you help them with.
Yeah, it's a broad question, but I try to keep it short. So Alvarez Marsal is an advisory firm out that is quite different from the others. It's different from the big four and also different from the MBBs. Our background historically is in restructuring. So that's where it all began 43 years ago in New York. The company specialized on failing businesses, turned them around, either wind them down or repurpose assets in the company or set them up for success again. But over the last decades, we've created a few additional pillars. I will outline them briefly. So we are also very, very active in the private equity space. We have probably the closest networks to most of the PE houses. We're advising them around M&A processes. And as you can imagine, the topic of AI is coming up everywhere because everybody's interested in efficiency. Everybody is interested in value generation. And that's a key part of our activities, not only here in Europe, but globally. And the other key pillar that is also emerged over the last decade is the corporate transformation space. So my team specifically, we're coming in really across a wide spectrum. We're speaking to big brands, household names that you and I know, maybe interact with on a weekly basis here in the UK, but in Europe. But we also speak to smaller firms that are maybe part of a private equity portfolio. They're just beginning to get their heads around what can we do with AI. And this variety of interactions is actually fascinating. And what's also interesting about A&M, we are really a firm of operators. So many of my colleagues, have either done it, have run organizations, have been hands-on. We don't have the classical consulting pyramid that we have a myriad of juniors that get seconded. We have actually the senior people doing the job. And this helps us right now because, the advent of AI also changes the way that we work. So we don't necessarily need that many juniors anymore to get the job done. Our own industry is changing. But we are very much outcome focused. So A&M is known for getting stuff done, not for fluffy programs that have no end.
For data governance and security and access controls.
You're absolutely right. It's a key concern. So we look, generally speaking, if you think about AI as, we use a metaphor of a triangle. I mean, you have the actual algorithms in the middle layer, right? You have the foundational layers that enable it. Some of them are tech, some of them are processes. And of course, you have on the top of the triangle or the pyramid, the mission statement, the governance principle, and also the strategy layer of the organization. So if you fall short on one of these dimensions, I'm simplifying now a little bit, you can't squeeze the value out of it. So from the get-go, we say, hey, this is not only about smart algos. This is much more nuanced. And of course, it depends on where the organization stands and also how disparate the data landscape is. I'm giving you one example where even with a lot of effort, companies still struggle. So right now, most of the underlying architectures have not been designed with an AI first principle. So
how do you mean architectures?
So think of it purely from a technology aspect, right?
Okay.
So we have relational data sitting in relational databases. We had flat files sitting here because that's the way we looked at it.
Yeah.
The shape of the data defined how we store it,
Yes.
right? So that means, of course, in consequence that organizations have, especially when they're bigger ones, a large zoo of data sets and systems to look at to build a governance model. So it's complex, right? Especially if you start to re-engineer it, who is actually owning what and so on. Now, what's interesting, though, the AI-first companies at the moment is the foundational model providers, obviously. But we also see some corporates looking at, hey, what can we actually learn from how these guys work with multimodal data? Because we have spreadsheets, we have PDFs, we have Word documents, we have images. The way they approach it is by using a completely different paradigm of actually storing and annotating and governing data. Global namespaces for everything. Doesn't matter anymore which function your data originates from. You have it in one system. Now, this makes, of course, the governance process much less tedious, because you get rid of this system-driven fragmentation to a data-first view of the world. So what I'm trying to get at, governance is the key issue.
Yeah.
It's hard. Well, it's not easy to do if you have to transcend system and physical boundaries of actually how you hold your data. You might have some data in backups that's still somewhat important,
Exactly.
but you don't touch upon it. But the future, the way we look at it as in our team and also the partners that we work with, this will be all flattened.
Okay.
And if you want, I can give you one example that brings it to life a little bit.
Yeah.
Think about pharma, for example, right? A very data-rich industry, doing a lot of R&D work, investing millions, if not billions, in doing research. And of course, the way we've historically looked at it is, trial and error. This molecule worked in that context. It's successful in moving it to the next stage. So it might take 10 years for you to build a cancer drug, right? And now some pharma companies begin to realize, hey, the way we've done R&D in the past was too fragmented. We had systems data here, we had reports there. Now we have the chance to kind of turn the entire concept upside down. And so what they're doing, and this is happening, they're taking data out of backup. Imagine we take 10 years worth of data out of backup.
What are you doing with it?
I'm coming to that in a moment, right? Putting it into a modern system where you can much more easily not only connect different data sets, but also semantically, and also with the help of embeddings, bridge sets across data sets that you have never linked. But the premise is they're betting very heavily on the fact that some of the R&D data, if I contextualize it with how research has moved on in the 10 years through publications and so on, I can have a fresh look at it, and I will find nuggets in there that might have previously been missed. But the elephant in the room is right now it's hard to do that. But these modern paradigms that I've outlined, it will become much more generic.
Okay.
It will be much easier to do so.
Okay.
To maybe have one last sentence on it. This is at the moment what I see is actually in corporate the biggest blocker for horizontal adoption in AI. It's not compute, it's not GPUs, it's not I'd say individual use cases, but for the value generation across a business, you need to be able to bring all of your data as quick as possible to the compute. And what's also beginning to change is the classical paradigm. I train at one point in time, I'm running inference at another point in time, is also beginning to collapse into one.
Really?
Continuous.
Because you mean like shorter feedback loops somehow between?
In a way, yes. But you're also
that?
able now to inject real-time information at inference time. So in other words,
got it.
If I'm looking at it, I want to have a 360 view of what's happening in my organization, be it R&D, what are my competitors doing, how well is marketing doing? And of course, we're all operating not in a vacuum, it's constantly changes happening around it. The companies who get that right will constantly be steps ahead of the competition. And right now, I think a small percentage point are beginning to get there. The tail is very, very long. So it's right now, I think the last 2 years we're we're fascinated by generative AI. We use it personally to do simple tasks. Then we saw the second wave of having now a tool attached to this model. It can do something. But now we realize, hey, there is a lot of potential, but especially in the corporate space, it requires a rethinking of the underlying foundational architecture and infrastructure, especially around storage, of how to unlock it. If you don't think about this, I think you fool yourself.
That's a fantastic example. Like, please make that analogy between, like, again, vendor selection for Gen AI versus like cloud. Like, what do you think the parallels are there?
Well, I think there are parallels, but also differences. I start with the differences on the vendor space in the Gen AI world. Of course, there's a incredible amount of proliferation right now. There's companies are quite young, quite new on the market, and it's clear that not all of them will make it. Let's be honest, the competition is too brutal. With every new feature release, OpenAI kills that many startups globally, so it's a rough spot to be. So here, of course, some caution should be applied when you say, hey, I'm getting on board with a small 4-month-old startup to provide services for business relevant functions. So we always advise be model agnostic, be able to switch endpoints if needed, so that you also benefit from the reduced costs and improved inference speed. Data sovereignty was an issue, but it has now a heightened awareness in the market. I mean, the trade war is on the moment only on goods. What will happen if the EU says, hey, we tax digital services? No, I
Interesting.
mean, it's not unthinkable in this day and age.
Got it.
But, do we need to be closer to home? Do we need to make sure we can run the system critical workloads in
Okay.
our own jurisdiction?
The biggest use cases for Gen AI have come from consumer companies, right? The ChatGPTs of the world, but the public awareness. But like now, are we at the point where we need to move beyond, generic chatbots that everyone uses for email to something a bit more custom for like my use cases? So yeah, curious to get your thoughts there. Again, in a world of like generic co-pilots or like ChatGPTs versus something built around me, what do you think the opportunity is there?
So the contextualizing in the domain-specific context of an organization that has already begun. So companies realize, okay, this is good and nice to have a generic model that can
Exactly.
do everything from
Yeah.
poetry to Sanskrit,
Yeah.
but help me write, emails better.
Yeah.
I want to have something that is much more deeply grounded in what we are doing as a business. And what we found interesting, we accompanied a few companies on that journey that fine-tuning on local content proved some uplift in
Oh, wow.
this.
Okay. Oh, so this isn't happening at like that level of the model. Because I was just thinking, the product with like the pixels the users are seeing. But you're saying like people are finding value like that, i.e., in fine-tuning the models themselves even?
Some
Yeah.
companies
Okay.
went down that
Okay.
route, and some of them
Okay.
were very bold when it was still expensive to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what we found interesting that in not in all cases, we saw in some cases where it was very domain specific, where the foundational models did not have any context on what this company or this specific function is actually doing, because the data is so specific. You don't find it in the open world.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That we also had to go beyond just language models. So in this case, we coupled a language model to a knowledge graph that was curated by the organization that contained verifiable domain information, that also had some, of course, semantic steer or a semantic layer encoded. How do we look at the world? What's our world model? How do we treat data? And these two paradigms coupled together is something actually that we see has a lot of value, where it really matters, where the quality matters, where also you need to be able to go beyond just information retrieval. So, for example, right now, let's be honest, most of the Gen AI use cases is synthesization, compression of information, recasting it. I'm talking about text now for a second. What's lacking now is also the ability to say, why am I seeing that pattern? Of course, these companies claim that there's reasoning abilities in these models. Okay, let me go to two aspects. I know I was going a little bit fast here. So Gen AI, on the one hand, has now found its place. Is one part of what we as practitioners would call the AI toolbox. We really look at it as a meta technology. It's one key component in there, but the underlying math, many matrix multiplication, mean in the end of the day, you have something that's quite intransparent and it's very good at recoding, rehashing information, and super importantly, can be your glue in linking across data sets. And it has enabled us for the first time to look into unstructured data at scale. The usefulness and the validity is there. However, we see a bit of a fatigue around knowledge retrieval or chatbots, right? It's beginning to become commoditized, and can't sell the 27th chatbot in an organization, right? It's more or less, we see also here commoditization and similar stacks becoming more prevalent with some customization. But the key issue is this really giving me enough value to when it's valuable to have access to the right information quicker, but can I go beyond this? Can I really ask more questions that go much deeper, that are really can support high stakes decision-making processes?
Right. The attribution is too hard to do.
Exactly.
Right.
So you throw many dollars at a problem, you see some uplift. So what has actually created this? You can't, to some degree, yes, but you can't fully attribute it yet. Now, these new models, however, can. They're a bit more tricky to build because you start the process in reverse. You don't begin with throwing data at a model. So you build a world model first, which is more like a representation that humans can also reason, this looks right. You forgot a factor here is important or not. Then you start populating it with data. Then you start to separate causality from correlation, and then you can also run what we call counterfactuals. What would happen if I would do something different? And think about it, in this day and age, everything's volatile. What's Trump doing next? What's happening in China? Well, we see now almost an independent AI ecosystem beginning to emerge across the entire value chain. So this gives me much more value than having a market report condensed in my email inbox early in the morning, because I can go beyond and extract value and position myself. And we see some companies, smaller ones, driving the entire decision-making organization with the help of such methods in niches.
Oh, really? Okay.
We also see that...
Is there like any vertical that I think that is like most primed, or like vertical or function that's most primed for this?
We see it in retail, in very specialized niches of retail. We see also some of the bigger retailer realizing, hey, we need to have this capability.
Okay, but things like maybe like supply optimization or like stocking, like what are they doing with
campaign, the way you run campaigns.
Oh, campaigns, okay, for marketing, okay.
Also think about when you, for example, you provide goods that people buy in a very, let's say, weather dependent way, or when it's very important to understand, what impacts holidays have, right? So we see some companies positioning there really, being few steps ahead in the way they run their campaigns, and in the way they also anticipate what's happening. And then if things don't happen as planned, or what I'm trying to say is they are also able to play with different scenarios ahead of time. So this technology, in short, allows you to root cause analysis backwards, but also play with counterfactuals going forwards. And that's something I would say most all other AI technologies can't do that well.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's completely overlooked right now in the discourse. Yeah. Everybody's talking Gen AI is, the elephant in the room, but there's also other animals here.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess maybe like to understand the tech stack there a bit, like, are there foundation models at all in this? Because you did mention world models. Like, is there like maybe a base foundation model?
Sorry, I should have been clear. So the world model in the context of a causal approach is quite different.
Okay, it's not a large language model.
No, we call it a causal graph. So a representation of what are the... And that's, again, where domain knowledge is key. And we, in our team, we always like to work closely with the home teams in organization, but also with domain experts, people who have done, a job for decades and know the idiosyncrasies about it, the stuff that is tacit and maybe not that well documented. And we bring them in the early stages of how are we looking at this problem? Can we create a common view now, without writing code, without running anything yet, of what are the key drivers of the problem? Which ones might be hidden from us, we can't directly measure them, which ones we can measure through data. And then we start populating the system where we have data, and also these approaches are much more tolerant if, in some cases, I might not have the complete data set, or have some facets missing of it. But the advantage is I also have not huge compute requirements, don't have all of that headaches to worry about. But it is something that is, at the moment, if you would look at the size of the developer community, it's not that big. It's tiny.
Got it. And this entire research direction is decoupled from that of the large language models, you say?
At the moment, it is.
It is.
But
okay.
I think we see more and more the demand for, having the information is why?
Why? Okay.
Which action should I take? And I can give you one example. I mean, this is also visible through some academic papers in the intelligence space. Think about military planning. Analysis of, I have a battlefield situation, right? I have information that is verifiable. Maybe I have satellite data that tells me what's happening on the ground. I might have other sources of information. I have human specialists that know a certain population or insurgent group quite well. So let's see, it's a very multifaceted situation to begin with, that causal methods and technologies, they're now being called argument technologies or argumentative technologies, begin to play a role. So what do we mean by that? So in the end, humans have to make a decision. But how can we arrive at a scenario that we have had a good discourse that is maybe stimulated or maybe enhanced through a model that is using causal paradigms to reason? And this is something language models can't do. In that space, forget it, right? Because you have no traceability. You can't afford to have hallucinations.
It's no-go. It's a no-go, yeah.
No-go, yes. You would not even invest a single dollar.
Interesting, yeah. Okay. I like that. Okay. So switching gears a bit to, I guess, we're in the closing section with, again, some whimsical questions we have here. One of them is, if you could wave like a magic wand, and have embed one AI capability, whether like technical or cultural, in like every consulting firm tomorrow, or given to start with A&M, what do you think that would be? Like, how could, like, what are some, again, magical use cases that you think would really unlock in your day-to-day at A&M today?
That's a great question, and as you can imagine, we're already working on a few things, because it's clear, our industry is also affected, and we need to evolve. So I think being able to synthesize information, maybe external information that's relevant to a case, elegantly, I think it's a must-have. There's no other way around it, and we already have initiatives underway. But also to go beyond just, I think the classical advisory is key. Being able to demonstrate something that is tangible, that in a way goes beyond the classical vehicle that many consultant companies still use, i.e. PowerPoint. Something that I would be very, very fond of, because in the end of the day, I'm still more of a technologist than a consultant. And I think we can do a better job in bringing data to life in such a way that the client already begins to see the
something
impact.
a bit more interactive, perhaps?
Definitely more interactive.
Okay.
Definitely more, and here the causal element plays a role, supporting decision-making processes rather than being prescriptive and linear. And also, it's clear, our clients are also seeing the revolution. They're also demanding more, right? I want to have a more comprehensive answer to a tricky question. This might differ from firm to firm. We are very operationally focused, getting things done. And we have people that have done things, right? So we're not doing it theoretically. So if we're convinced that maybe using AI in a certain way is the right thing to do, I think it's only fair that clients expect, hey, we want you to have a skin in the game. You do that for us, right? So show me, don't tell me that you can do it. And of course, that is, let's say, I think this is a good change and a good pressure for us to adapt to. Our commercial models will have to evolve. Our relationships might be tighter, and not like, oh, we've created a report for you, and this is the outcome. That still needs to be there.
Of course.
I'm not saying that will go away.
Yeah.
But
like we're botting on the outcome of this. Yeah.
Look at it on the macro level. Now, AI will put so much pressure on businesses to reinvent themselves, right? There's no question. Some of it will not make it. Some of it will need help on the way to do it.
Yeah.
If we're convinced we can help a firm on that journey to achieve a certain outcome, I think it's only fair that our clients also say, okay, show me more than advisory. Help me on the ground in doing that. Work with my teams, work across all the functions, because it's not only the data science team, it's other business functions as well. And that's what I like about A&M. In many projects, we are on different lanes, all right? So it's not like we are developing an algo or we're advising only on that, but it's how does it fit into the overall business model? Do we have the right structure in the organization to support this? And I think the next years will be interesting, transformative. Right now, everything's volatile, many different levels, but there's also opportunities in that volatility. And spotting them, again, ahead of time.
That is a perfect place to close. Thank you for joining me today, Michael.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.